Okay. Good afternoon, Londonderry families. I'm William Van Bennekom, the principal at Londonderry Middle School. And today afternoon with my colleagues from the high school and those here at the middle school with us, we're here to present on a proactive bullying education forum. What I'd like to do first is go around the room, have everybody introduce who they are, what their position is at each individual school, and then from there, we'll proceed with our presentation. So starting to my right, Mrs. Heather Newman.
Hi, I'm Heather Newman. I am the 8th grade school counselor at the middle school. I'll be moving to 6th grade next year.
I'm Dave Sutherland. I'm one of the assistant principals at the middle school.
Abby Sloper, Londonderry Middle School assistant principal.
I'm Crystal Rich. I'm the House 3 assistant principal at Londonderry High School and the director of alternative education.
I'm Ryan O'Connor. I'm the House 2 assistant principal at Londonderry High School.
I'm Rick Barnes. I'm the principal at Londonderry High School.
I'm Bob Callahan, the House 1 assistant principal at the high school.
I'm Sarah Doherty. I'm the school counselor, one of the school counselors in House 4 at the high school.
I'm Catherine Buell. I'm the school to community counselor at the high school.
I'm Don Mullen, school counselor at the high school in House 1.
Hello, I'm Katie Sullivan. I'm one of the assistant principals at Londonderry High School, House 4.
All right, thank you, everyone. And we'll begin with why are we here this afternoon. So as a principal at Londonderry Middle School, we are here this afternoon to share and discuss the bullying procedures and how they are applied in our schools. In this presentation, we will provide an overview of our approach, discuss the process of bullying investigations, and explain the application of age-appropriate consequences.
And I just wanted to add, we're here in the spirit of prevention, partnering with our parents and families, and as William alluded to, sharing our process.
All right.
We'll first start with the definition, the New Hampshire State and the Londonderry School District definition of bullying, defined as a single significant incident or a pattern of incidents involving written, verbal, electronic communication, physical or a physical act or gesture directed at another pupil, which...
There's other facets of the definition. Bullying must include at least one of the following. It must physically harm a pupil or damage the pupil's property, interfere with the pupil's educational opportunities, cause emotional distress to a pupil, create a hostile educational environment, substantially disrupt the orderly operation of the school. Also included in this are two aspects of the definition where there is an imbalance of power, and it can or may include the use of electronic devices. And we'll dive deeper into this, especially when it comes to electronic devices, what that means on and off campus. One thing to consider when looking at bullying during an investigation, especially at the middle school, is determining the difference between conflict and bullying. Here listed are some of the things that we have to look at when determining whether something is a mutual conflict between two or more individuals or is closer to the definition of bullying.
So, thanks, Dave. When we are posed with a situation that we have to investigate to determine if something is bullying or something other than bullying, we do a thorough investigation, which includes interviewing witnesses, alleged victims, alleged perpetrators, and as far as reviewing surveillance tape, electronic media content, a thorough investigation. Now, if we go back to some of the finer points of what defines bullying, we can dive deeper into really what that looks like. So for the first two, physically harmed the student and damaged property, that's fairly self-explanatory. We look for evidence of that. Interfering with the victim's educational opportunities, what does that look like? That looks like change in school attendance, missing parts of classes, missing school activities or participating in school activities, reluctance to do that, or avoidance of certain things. That's a little bit more specific in terms of what interfering with educational opportunities look like. For causing emotional distress to this victim, we look for evidence of excessive emotional behavior, excessive amounts of anxiety, being nervous to attend a certain place, being scared, overly scared, isolation, socially removed, changes in affect, That's all part of the process of our investigation of what we're in particular looking for. What does creating a hostile education environment looks like? Is there significant tension between students that pervades the area? It could be a classroom, it could be the school as a whole. When we move to substantially disrupting the orderly operation of school, significant incident of disruption, we may have to call secure campuses. Violations of behavioral expectations are also things that we're looking for. And finally, creating an imbalance of power, all right? Oftentimes, when we have to determine whether something is peer conflict or bullying, we do look at, is there an imbalance of power? That can look at bullying based on disabilities. That can look like anonymity of online behavior. These are all characteristics of bullying that we look for. Harassing, tormenting behavior. And finally, the last piece is the use of electronic devices, which we'll get into a little bit later in this presentation. But are cell phones used? Are social media used? Is that the conduit for this type of behavior? So if we go to the next slide, once we do our thorough investigation, we really have to apply a test. And what does that test look like? It's really 3 questions. And based on the previous slide and those areas that we look for, we ask ourselves, is there at least one investigation finding? If there is, that's just cause enough for us to move on to the next question. The next question is, does this investigation conclude that this incident, and the key word here is single significant incident, if we determine it to be a single significant incident that largely applies to the aforementioned points that I just made, we can determine that to be bullying. If we can't answer yes to that question, we move to the third question. If it's not a single significant incident, is this something that, based on the investigation, leads us to believe that this is an incident in a pattern of incidents? And if that's the case, and we do determine it is an incident as part of a larger pattern, that's a qualification for deeming something bullying.
So once the investigation concludes, we are still left with 2 students or multiple students who are looking to return to school in their classes. These are some of the strategies that we go to support our learners, and a lot of this work is done with our school counseling department who is here today. So some of the pieces we touch upon are coping strategies, and that could include peer mediation, how to regulate our emotions, what does productive problem solving look like, how can students advocate for themselves, that one trusted adult piece, who can they go to, whether it's a friend or one of their teachers or even an administrator. What does conflict resolution look like between students or peers? How can we recognize difference in friendships? Being an upstander. When you see something, you say something. If you see someone who is having a hard time, you can step in or you can report it. What does it look like to have love and kindness in our schools or to be empathetic? What does perspective taking look like? And again, that one trusted adult.
All right, and then as we finish up or wrap up the presentation, one of the key aspects that I always, and I'll speak for the middle school on this, is one of the things that's important is the parents' report. A lot of times kids will not always share with an adult. Sometimes they'll go to a school counselor, as we mentioned, as being an advocate for students in school. They may seek out a teacher or an administrator. But for parents at home and parents that are there, if your kids are coming home and they're concerned about something going on in school and regarding themselves, I can't stress enough to please reach out to us. Oftentimes, though we're in the building with children a lot and we see the things that are going on within our schools, we don't always know exactly how some of those things may be impacting your children. So it's important that you let us know. In addition to that, we always encourage everyone to speak with your student too. How was your day in school? Oftentimes in middle school, that phrase can often be, it was fine, but sometimes it's not fine. Sometimes there are things going on that may be subtle at times, but are really significant to individual students that often require us to really take a deeper look. And then I can't, and again, emphasize enough, give us a call. A lot of us work with students and have done this work for a long time. We do work hand in hand with counselors. We do address bullying in lots of different ways in which we go about talking with kids and making sure that we're reaching and meeting the concern that kids have and that we're ceasing what's going on. Most kids in middle school wanted to stop. That's what they're really seeking. They just wanted to stop. But oftentimes we're challenged with parents being afraid to bring something forward and not bring attention to their student, while the student is also concerned about what is everybody else going to think. So these are all important aspects of the process. So I can't stress enough to really make this go away or to help students. It really does take your child, the family, working with our schools to make that kind of triangle fit for what's best for all of our students. And that's, of course, what we want.
So the last bullet point, it really starts probably in the later elementary ages when students begin to get access to smartphones, and they're ubiquitous now, they're everywhere. We can't live with them, we can't live without them. And I think the piece that I want to implore families certainly from probably all of our perspectives, is to monitor your child's cell phone. Doesn't really matter how old they are. If you think something's going on, you need to trust. I would encourage you to trust that parental instinct and check out your student's phone. There's all these things that we're talking about. They're serious. They're challenging. But the use and proliferation of social media, including group chats and texting and all the other social media things that come up, and there's a new one every day, ends up being gasoline on this fire. And so, with partnering with us, with the schools and families, and working together, we can really, use it with parents really taking an active role in the cell phone area. It's super helpful. Students don't like it. It's their autonomy. It's become a part of what they know, but it's really, really important that you trust your instinct as a parent. And then if you find things, please, by all means, we want you to report them and share them with us so that we can be of help in supporting your child.
And then I think we're available for any questions. We can either begin with those that may be online or families online or those that are present. Either way is fine. So,
as far as bullying goes and then the progressive discipline, is it the same? Do you guys have the same stance in the middle school as you do in the high school? Does that transfer? And if there are incidences that happen in the middle school and then when they go to high school, does that follow those kids? So if there's a repeat incident in high school that may have happened in 7th or 8th grade, what's the recourse there? Is that something where we have to reach out to Mr. Barnes and say, well, this actually happened, we had an incident before, and re-explain it? Or does that sort of travel with the students?
good question. So I'm going to start with maybe our counselors and Dave, as they work with 8th graders, at least speak to that first, and then we can go around the room.
I can jump in. If you remember, I had said as part of our investigation, we look at a variety of things. And one of those is past social histories between students. So if it's pertinent to the case, absolutely that would be taken into consideration.
And I can say that at the high school, for sure, because we're at the end of that pipeline, we do have that ability to go back, and we have gone back before to see if there's similar behaviors or things that would be in line with what we're seeing, to take that into consideration if it's appropriate.
To answer the first part of your question, based on the incident, that helps us dictate the consequence. Just because it's substantiated bullying doesn't automatically equal an out-of-school suspension, so there is a leverage there based on the actual incident.
Do we convey, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about, we can
No,
take
so
time
when,
to.
it even goes back to elementary school. So when we have our 6th graders coming in and we're working them for 3 years, I'm working with the counselors for 3 years as well. So we are always talking, not just amongst ourselves, but we also have the ability to reach out to the assistant principals and seek that. Even as the kids transition to the middle school, we're talking about those 5th graders now. I'm getting that information so we can make good decisions to prevent anything and any carryover that may occur. But should it occur, we both have access to that information by reaching out and having conversations, and also what is in the student information system as well to look back to.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else here? I know Scott Sicard is monitoring on what?
Nothing from. I had a question
Yes, sir.
about the upstanders, and if you see something, say something. A lot of kids do want to say something, but they're afraid of the retaliation, and it's not just the social media, it's the friend that they report it against, it's all their friends that come into it as well. So how do you go about, systemic stopping that behavior?
So that starts with the investigation itself to maintain anonymity and protect the child's dignity, both the victim and the perpetrator, to the best of our ability. Of course, in the middle school, I can speak, that information is hard to really keep quiet as best possible. However, we do have policies against retaliation. So when that does occur, we do our best to nip it in the bud, oppose any progressive discipline we need to impose as a result of that, and stop retaliation when it occurs. Much like bullying, we do rely on this triangle between the family, the child, and the school to find out if that's happening and work to stop it immediately.
And I think the preventative piece in that is we're present in the hallways. So oftentimes we can hear, hey, stop, hey, knock it off, you shouldn't do that. An adult reacting to it in the minute also helps support that. So I think that's a key piece too, just our awareness. In the classrooms, even in the bathrooms, you might hear some water splashing or some things like that could indicate a conflict.
And I think there's two kinds of upstanders. There's the student, the person in the moment who's addressing it, which is super, very brave and what we want for students to do, but to your point, it's a challenge. But then there's also more of the upstander behind the scenes that says, I don't feel like I can do this in public, but can come to us on the side, and we do our absolute best, and probably in most cases, if not every case, to protect that person's anonymity. We're not required to share where that information comes from. We're here to make sure that if that information is being reported to us, we investigate, is it true, is it not true, because we want to be able to encourage kids to bring problems forward, because we know that's an issue.
And I can speak at least to the middle school. A lot of times when these things begin, we do have a good honest conversation, both with the parents and the student, to let them know, okay, we're going to begin. We want to make sure you're aware of that, because we want to make sure right away that once we start looking into it, or we're talking to students, or getting in doing an investigation, we don't want the person who's reporting to be caught off guard. We want them to be well prepared that in the event there is any retaliation or something is said, that they are prepared, in essence, if that happens, and how to go about reporting that to us right away. So it's really important for kids, particularly at this age, because it's a really delicate issue with them at the middle school level at least. So.
And not to harp on the point too much, but it's also the awareness and knowing students. So there's the nuance there in just their demeanor, how they present themselves, how they're speaking, whether it's before or after a class or an exchange in the hallway. So again, I don't want to speak for the counselors too, but there's a pretty good open door piece with that, and just kind of following that body language too indicates. You don't have to say something to know that something might not be okay.
I think it's also important to note that the amount of positivity that comes out of a lot of these investigations is important to recognize. So it allows us to have positive conversations with kids. It teaches them coping strategies and conversational skills and dealing with conflict resolution. And as scary as it is to take this on and to make a report and to do those types of things, we're really working on those skills with these kids. And a lot of times when we get to the point where we can sit down and have conversations and mediate between the two, they have that chance to see the other side of another student's perspective, and that really helps them to grow as students as well.
Can I just add in that I think it's very important that the schools and families work together as well. We're lucky at the high school, and middle school, and this whole district actually, that we have very good working relationships with families who are brave enough to come forward and tell us things. And I think the perfect stories always end well when all families are working together. The ones who reported it and the ones that we have to call home and say, we got some stuff on your child, we need to talk about this. And it's very, very helpful when we have those parents who we have to make those tough phone calls to say, your child might have been mean or has been mean or has done this, to work through that as well. It's wonderful because I strongly believe, like Ms. Rich said, that we have some great conversations with our kids. They're mature enough to have these kids, but if the follow-through is not there between school and home, then we're right back at the beginning. So I strongly encourage that anybody who gets these phone calls at home from an admin or a school counselor, maybe take a deep breath and let's all work together, because it's really, like we say, we are reteaching these kids all the time. We always tell them, you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes, and we're going to teach you, and we're going to reteach you, and we're going to get through it, whether it's from consequences or peer mediation or a good ending type of thing. That's what we're here for. But the home and school piece, I think, is a key component of working together to make a difference.
Yes, ma'am.
How often do you talk to the students about bullying? I know, like at elementary, they talk quite regularly about it. Is it something that happens through middle school and high school?
Good question.
I think that we talk about it and we use our storm times, especially the homeroom time on Mondays, to facilitate those discussions. And we rely on the teams to have those because they do see the kids the most. So they are the ones that are going to bring that up, and they're the ones that the kids are going to listen to the most, versus me calling out, say, all the 8th graders together into a big assembly, right? That's not going to go over well. So when we have our teams to do that and our counselors in with them, that's where that takes place at the middle school. That's who they're going to listen to, and they're the ones that have that. Under the guys, and the time to set aside to do that is our Monday storm times, specifically at certain times of the year. And usually they do that at the beginning of the year, and then at the ends of trimesters, right? Let's check in, how are we doing? When they have their end of the trimester raffles, right? And awards and types of things like that. That's when they bring that into those discussions. Okay. Certainly if an assistant principal sees a pattern on a team, we're going to intervene and we're going to have team-wide discussions or classroom discussions if we need to as well, with the counselors present.
So similarly at the high school, I would say that, we certainly have our procedures at the beginning of the year, like as part of the student handbook and those conversations. We recognize as students age, they tend to either not read the policies or tune out, especially if there's a lot of adults speaking to them. This year, we've been trying to avoid, and in past years too, mix that with programming in that we can. So we have our health curriculum that's embedded in, but that's early on in freshman year. We have Lancer Speak Up Day that's been going on for 3 years now that focuses more on wellness. And we're trying to really address root causes of situations like bullying. All these things, they're really overlapped. And so we're trying to recognize that with what the research out there is saying. And additionally, we have the Life of a Lancer contract for athletics and actually extracurricular activities, and athletics. 82% of what the students at the high school have that contract, or that are governed by that contract. It's probably the strictest code of conduct that I've dealt with in 4 different high schools. So I think there's a piece in there that we've spent some time this year in the spring in particular as an administrative team going out, reaching out to teams. So like somewhere around 60% of our students are athletes. We're trying to find how to get that greater group of our students and have that biggest impact and have conversations. Hey, you're part of this code of conduct. This is what character issues mean. If you fall into, not only are there school consequences potentially, then there are athletic consequences too. And so finding those leverage points with adolescents, that's what we're really trying to work towards at the high school, because finding things that they're invested in and they care about is really a key point to try to sustain and create and sustain that change.
The other thing that we do at the high school quite often is we're looking to foster leadership skills constantly. And the more students we can get into leadership roles or put them in positions where they feel as though they're being a leader, that really encourages them to kind of promote that within other students and helps the culture to rise up to that other level. So it's kind of addressed in all different ways, especially at the high school level, where I would echo Dave's sentiment of sticking them all in one room and having a conversation isn't as effective as you like it to be. But I think the house system at the high school really gives us that personalized connection with kids. And it's different from a lot of high schools, but we feel it's really effective.
A lot of the points that Rick brought up and Abby brought up about building a positive culture, touching upon what Crystal had said, there's a lot of direct as well as indirect ways in which we try to build that positive culture to ward off any potential bullying cases or anything like that. But we've had a lot of conversations lately with kids, groups of kids or one-on-one or even small groups, where we really try to teach them something that a lot of them are missing, and that's you don't know how someone's going to respond to something if you haven't walked a mile in their shoes. And it's that teaching them that perspective. A lot of kids, developmentally appropriate, they don't recognize that, they don't consider it. We hear oftentimes, oh, I was just trying to be funny, I thought it was a joke. But we have to proactively teach them to understand that unless you know the environment, unless you know that person sitting next to you closely, we don't have to walk around on eggshells around each other, but we have to take that into consideration when we interact with each other. So we can't just dismiss things as, oh, I was being funny, when it could potentially do harm to someone. So that's taught directly, but also indirectly as well.
And that's what we're seeing in a lot of our investigations as well. It's not necessarily one significant incident. It's a lot of small things that are happening with a lot of kids over time to a certain child And every kid just thinks, oh, I just said something once. I didn't mean it to be that way. And so now we have a whole group of kids involved in an investigation and not necessarily the single significant incident that's really easy to determine.
As William said with that last graphic with the triangle, really for this to work, for school to work, we need all working in concert, the family, the student, and the school. So we always ask parents at home, caregivers, guardians, have those conversations with your students about perspective and understanding people. It's a human skill, it's a human quality, human skill that can never be overtaught.
Thanks for doing this for us, guys. I appreciate it. But to sort of piggyback on what Crystal or Mrs. Rich and Mr. O'Connor said, it seems like by the definition you gave that there needs to be a single significant incident for it to qualify as bullying, and then you're saying, what if there's a lot of small incidences along the way where uniquely, my son is going from middle school to high school, and I helped coach the wrestling team. So it's amazing what kids will just talk about with you standing there.
Yep.
And so, I've been part as a parent and as a coach, seeing, as an example, being a person of color, like my son being called a certain name by one person who doesn't quite understand what they're saying. My son does. So he is now, in this investigation for something that maybe that person's goal wasn't to bully. So then whose perspective are we looking at the bullying from, the bully or the victim? So that becomes a little bit tougher. And then let's say that is handled appropriately, which I think the middle school did a wonderful job with doing. But then what happens if a second student says that to my son, or a third student? And it doesn't have to be a student of color. In the wrestling room, you hear, oh, look at this kid, he's missing weight. Like, weight's a big thing. And so if one kid says, hey, you're overweight, he might be joking. This other kid might say it. This other kid, now this kid's heard it 30, 40 times. And so each person, it might be a small incident to them, but it really does start to pile on these students. And so that's when you get the explosion, the big incident that happens. And it's like, who's being held accountable for that? Like, that poor student has to hear something multiple times from multiple different students who are all just being told, well, this doesn't even really qualify by your definition as bullying, but this student absolutely feels bullied. So how is that addressed? I know how I addressed it as a parent. I know I've had that discussion, but overall, how should that be addressed? It's a really complicated and tough thing, and even by the definition we're getting, it seems like it's always told from the bully's perspective as opposed to the perceived victim, because what you're saying could be funny. I might find it hilarious. We could be in the Tom Brady roast, and I think it's funny, but Giselle doesn't. So it's like, but if everybody's saying it a little by little, that starts to chip away and erode at that student's confidence. It does affect them. It meets the other criteria, but by then, that student's not willing to set up because there's 20, 30 people that are saying things to them without repercussion. So I'm just like, it seems like there's a little bit of opportunity to sort of develop a slightly different plan here to address that, but I just don't know, if you guys have any thoughts on that. It's a big concern of mine, especially just the things that I've heard just by sitting within earshot of some of these kids. So, anything you guys would like to discuss on that would be welcome.
I can start.
Go ahead.
So, first off, an incredible example, right? It is a very real world example. You lived it. So, to answer one part of your question, the law is written from the perspective of the victim, not the perpetrator. To that end, what that means is, if we use these points here that are in the law, if you have one victim who doesn't meet these, and I'm just going to pick out one as an example. So when you talk about emotional distress, you can have something happen to victim A, and there's no emotional distress, and none of the other criteria, and therefore is possibly a school infraction and has a consequence, but doesn't initiate a bullying investigation. You can have the exact same thing happen to a different child with a different reaction, and it could then lead to the indicators that which would launch a bullying investigation, because you have emotional distress. Okay? So that answers the first part of your question. Then when you've got multiple things happening to a child from multiple perpetrators, You can have a situation where a child gets a consequence for what they did, a second child gets a consequence for what they did. At some point, the administration is working with the victim, and if all of a sudden an indicator of bullying pops up, that can launch the bullying investigation. And all of those individuals are part of the investigation. So at some point, if it's happening 35 times, I would hypothesize that we're going to meet one of these criteria. That kid's gonna have it up to here. There's gonna be emotional distress, right? What we'd hopefully do is get to that point where that child reacts negatively and we can prevent that. But that would launch a bullying investigation, most likely, because this criteria would be met over time. And they would all be included in that to make a determination of whether or not there was an imbalance of power as a result of what they were doing, right? And now at the middle school, I can speak, is this a copycat? Is this two people who don't really know each other, but they saw it happen, and the other kid wanted to be cool, so he repeated it, right? Not knowing that they were affecting that child so greatly. Those are the kind of things that you tease out in the investigation. You guys want to add to that?
I was going to take more of kind of a broader view of what you're talking about. I think when we talk about accountability, the adults are accountable for this too. The adults in the room. In your case, it's coaches, teachers in a room. If something's happening on a repetitive basis, we want to empower the adults, which is our staff, that are legally required to either report these things and hopefully do something about them and report them. It's establishing that culture, whether it's a sports team or the classroom, creating an environment that's appropriate. We, like, as people who work in schools, kids say things all the time, and they're not aware. Sometimes they're not aware, and it's being willing to intervene and say, as we're supposed to, say, hey, I'm seeing it right here, like, it's inappropriate. I think that's establishing that culture. It's a cultural piece, like as a building culture, and I think that's something that we can always work on and continue to strive to improve and get better at. But it is complicated, but it requires more folks than administration. I think it's all the adults coming together saying, like, okay, enough, we shouldn't be talking about this.
I would add too that that's a very difficult situation. I don't know if there is a really easy answer to that, because I've seen that, like you said, oftentimes it can be just fooling around. Kids don't recognize that they're actually more than one kid keeps saying the same thing, and the kid who keeps being, teased or picked on isn't saying anything either until you said, boom, then it blows up, and all of a sudden then it unravels, and we're left thinking, why were we not proactive? Why weren't we stepping in early? Why didn't we see this beforehand? I don't know if I have a really good answer to that, because I was thinking about multiple, I was using more as your scenario, teams, because I can see it more on athletic teams, not purposefully all the time, but just like you said, kidding around. Obviously wrestling with weight being part of that as well, but I see it other places too. And really being, as I think everybody's trying to say, as proactive as we can be is a strategy. Is there one single working strategy? I'm not so sure. But ears, hearing what the kids are saying, what's going on. Oftentimes we have to pause, and we do have to do the big group thing, because I can't single-handedly just take. It's not just one little group anymore. It's a big group, and kids are talking about things, and it's pulling them together and saying, "Hey, listen, this is inappropriate. You should not be using this type of language or making these types of references. Understand that the way that these things are heard by others is hurtful." And sometimes you just have to. Sometimes we have to do that, whether it's by team, grade, classroom. Sometimes that's the way you have to go out, or whatever it may be. But it's a very good scenario, and at middle school, I can definitely see where that happens. And the kid who's hearing it doesn't say anything, and that's because he's part of a group and doesn't want to. So, thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to, sorry. I just wanted to mention, just because it's something that kind of came up lately, luckily my daughter is still in the habit of talking to us and letting us know about things, but I figure as she gets into high school, that's going to kind of go away. And I think this is where it's starting to transition from kids being keyboard warriors to now they're actually doing it in person. But there's a big trend right now going around. I don't know, y'all may already know about it, but it's in the hallway. They'll go by somebody and go, "Hi," and the person will be like, "Hey," and they'll go, "Oh, why are you talking to me? Jeez, well." And I know for my daughter, I've always taught her, you treat other people the way you want to be treated. And I think to her, it's so devastating to have somebody treat her that way, and she's just like, and I just see her gradually withering. And it's just funny because it actually happened to my ex-husband at the track meet on Monday from another school. Luckily, it wasn't Londonderry, but two of the girls from another team, and I don't think they realized he was an official because we were running the meet. And they did that. They were like, hi, and he was like, hey, and they were like, ew, yuck. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So, again, this kind of goes along with the whole group, thing. It's 1 and 2 people here and there and everything, but it does happen. It's happening all the time. And I don't want my daughter to become a statistic. I talk to her all the time. I tell her to please come to me, but I'm just like, I don't understand how these other children don't understand. And I know some are just not taught that and taught to treat people, nicely in the way they want to be treated, but I don't know what the answer is. Detention, suspension, at what point they realize, hey, it hurts. It really hurts. It hurts as an adult. You have people bully you, even still as an adult, and it hurts. So I just wanted to make people aware that that's the latest trend going on in the hallways. So I don't know, and going by as the comments go, it may not be heard by somebody, but that's the latest. So
Maybe a comment?
In the middle school, unfortunately, the brain development of children isn't at the stage where they empathize easily because they're so egocentric, right? So to what these guys were saying is and this slide here, which is the strategies, that is where in the middle school it only comes through the education to try to get them to develop those processes that build empathy and thinking outside of themselves. But we're battling brain development, so we're in some ways fighting a losing battle, right? But all we can do is keep the teaching up and teaching that through what our teachers do every day, through the counselors work with them. And then, of course, when we see that in the hallways, say something as the adults around those children to redirect the behavior. We can still treat the behavior, which is what we're responsible for doing, while we educate them to hopefully get them to start thinking like that. So those types of behaviors are best nipped through our presence in the hallways as adults, listening and watching as best we can with 300 kids moving in an eighth grade hallway, and then stop them immediately when they do, and have those discussions, and et cetera.
And I think the next step of that, we talked a lot about the metacognition, learning, developing, understanding, being empathetic. But what is also valuable is arming with the language or the tools to respond. You're caught off guard when that happens. You're dumbfounded. You can't believe what you just heard, or you were approached that way, or it was said on Xbox, or you got that text. And for all we know, someone could have been recording the interaction. There's all those layers and scenarios, but it's also that sound bite of, hey, that's not cool, right? As stupid as it sounds, you don't get to talk to me like that. Something that simple gives that sense of empowerment, so you have a go-to. You might not report it because you're uncomfortable. You might not go to your school counselor or come to your AP or your principal, but you might have enough just to say, you don't get to talk to me like that. Don't talk to me, please. And then you can walk away. So again, when I'm working with 11-year-olds, that's really, really hard to do, but just one little go-to might make you feel a little bit better in the hallway to be able to kind of defend yourself a little bit. It's appropriate, it's respectful, you got yourself out of the situation, and you can carry on. So there's value in that as well.
That education, the conduit to that is that last bullet point right there, one trusted adult. It's a really important thing that we have and believe in the middle school and the high school, where every student, it's our goal to have at least one trusted adult that they can go to. And sometimes that one trusted adult might lead that student to a school counselor or administrator, or sometimes have just a one-on-one conversation, but that's the conduit there to help arm that student to be able to, as Abby said, navigate those challenges.
Great, and I appreciate that. I'm sorry, work was not cooperating today to get here on time, so I missed the entire presentation.
Oh, it'll be online. We're good.
And honestly, I'll add too, even when you say things like that, I didn't know that. I wouldn't have recognized that, but, from a principal's point of view, it's really helpful when I inform other parents. Can you take time tonight to talk to your child? Ask if they're doing this in the hallways, and if they are, ask them to stop. Because really, most parents are very reactive to wanting to make sure their kids do what they're supposed to do in school. And if they know and ahead of time that this may be happening, or their children may be participating in it, most will address it with them.
Sometimes
And it's a really easy conversation to have.
It's a harder phone call to call when you have to call and say, hey, your child is bullying another parent. Like, a lot of them, my child's doing what? I know sometimes it's not always that case, but yeah, they're really emotionally distraught about it, so it's a good conversation all around.
Perspective is the key word, teaching kids perspective and to acknowledge perspective.
Thank you, and I appreciate that tip. I just additionally wanted to ask because I actually witnessed previous meet and a year before, same children from a different school, like doing stuff like that. I didn't want to be the tattletale parent necessarily.
You should report it to, especially athletics, it can be reported to the athletic director, or it can be reported to the principal.
Okay.
It's not uncommon for principals. We will talk amongst one another and share that this happened today at this meet, or this happened today at this game, or I saw this student say this, and they'll do the same too. And it's really an effort to avoid that type of thing going on. And again, they may not know.
Mhm.
And
Well,
in
yeah.
most cases, the other cooperating schools will address it too.
And it
They won't
gets
say
to
anything.
it's the sportsmanship piece too.
Yeah.
You're representing our schools, our name is
Yeah.
on your chest.
Right.
Wear it proudly and represent us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we dig into that pretty quickly too, so, whether at the athletic department or here, so.
I can't stress enough either, just some parents, when they come up to the high school, think they have to take a step back. We believe that you should take more steps forward and still be in your child's life and be contacting with us. I think this world is a different world. I'm sounding pretty old right now, but I think it's a different world that we're growing up in. The level of meanness and the way people are mean are different now. But as a society and as a school and a Londonderry community, we can't bow down to that. We got to step forward. I wish we had the easy answers for some of these things. It's frustrating for us to see these kids walk through our offices and report this stuff. It's very frustrating when we don't have a good working relationship with everybody to make sure this isn't it. But we're living in a different world where we need to take more proactive, like somebody said, what are we doing, to be proactive and stuff. And the trends, I think that's the trend right now, and I think next week there's going to be another trend, and it's very hard as admin at this district to keep up with this. We don't back down from it, but it's very hard to challenging to find those ways to navigate this. But I want to just jump on what Ms. Sloper said is we have a lot of conversations where to advocate for these kids to use their voices. Don't let anybody ever try to take your power, and to find your way to use your voice to stick up to these people. And if you can't, that's why we're here and that's why we start our investigations. But teach your kids very young, because these kids are, they don't grow up to be mean, they start, and, it takes a lot of years, but teach them young how to stick up for themselves and don't tolerate this stuff. And I hope that through our strategies and the family strategies, it eventually will work out, but it does take time, unfortunately, because I believe the world we live in is a different society. But as I want to say to people who are watching, as a town in Londonderry, we need to do better, we need to teach our kids better, and we need to make this bullying kind of culture go away quickly. And like we said earlier, we have a lot of conversations with our students. And they're always like, why are you talking to us? We're the good kids. We're not doing any of this. And we're like, exactly, but we need you to step up even more. When you see something, you say something. You see something in the halls, or if you see a trend, you don't participate. Social media, that's a whole nother thing. It's awful. If you see a post about something, you don't need to like it, because that person who that post is about is looking at those likes. So it's all those tough conversations that we're having, very happy to have, but we need to work together to be better in this town.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else here? Mr. Sakar, you got anybody online?
Nope. I have one more question. How do you put students that are perceived as victims, how do you tell that, the people, the perpetrator or bullying the person, how do you tell the student, put yourself in the other person's shoes? Whether the kid might identify as something, a person of color, or how do you put the children in their shoes, the other person's shoes, to make them fully understand that?
Good question.
Great question.
I say with honest conversations.
Yeah.
We, the tough, honest conversations we have in our offices are not easy, but they're needed. And we don't hide things. I think it's involving the parents as well. I think a lot of the times when we have the other students with a lot of peer mediation and they have honest conversations, it's easier at the high school sometimes. They can have those mature conversations and be like, do you know what it feels like when you say that, or when you look at me, or when you did that? Those are the most wonderful conversations because they can interact with each other. But it's very hard, but it's having those honest conversations and not hiding anything. You are making somebody feel this way, plain and simple. And then just following through with everything.
That's difficult too. Humans, we largely make decisions based on emotions, right? If in having those conversations, as Katie was saying, we can lead the student to emotionally feel how someone could be feeling, that really drives home the point. More often than just saying, hey, you need to consider this person's perspective. Like, oftentimes when bullying occurs, there's reasons behind it.
Yeah, behavior serves a purpose.
Exactly. And when you start peeling back the layers and having these conversations, you start to find out a little bit more about a person, and that's where the raw emotions come in, and that's where the teachable moments come.
Great.
Well said. Yes, ma'am?
One more.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I know about middle school, but I was wondering for the high school, are cell phones allowed in the locker rooms? Just
You asking me?
Oh,
Sorry. In
You
the
know
middle
where I need to
school,
direct that
as you know,
to?
they're not. Middle school is a lot different than setting. All kids are expected to have in their book bag, and book bags and phones are not permitted in the locker rooms at all at any time.
okay.
The kids do have their cell phones in the locker rooms. They're not permitted in academic settings, so a classroom, study hall, unless it's in the cafeteria. They can have them in the hallways, in the lunchroom, but other than that, that's, we allow them.
We put something new in the handbook this year that described, that recording somebody without their consent in this state is criminal, can be criminal. So that's something that we've kind of put in the handbook this year and reminded them that as you're becoming adults, you're gonna have your phone with you, but you probably shouldn't be filming people, you shouldn't be filming people without their consent, and there can be real serious legal consequences for that. There's school consequences potentially, but then there's also legal consequences, because it can be pretty serious.
Correct.
Like I know, just coming from a criminal justice background, that was my concern, because I worry, especially with girls, it's like, oh, let's take a picture of somebody and make fun of them and then pass it around, and I'm like, they don't know, that's child pornography if the person is under 18. Hello, so that's
Hard lesson.
Yep.
going to even further things that I'm wondering, are they understanding that, and are they notified of that? Because that's what I worry. My daughter already, she's like, I don't want to change in the locker room. And I'm like, well, you're gonna have to at some point. Like, you're going to have to.
They
And
don't
I
have
just
to change their clothes in the high school. For phys ed, they don't have to change their clothes.
Oh, okay.
So-
Oh, well, that'll
They
be, I
drop
can
their
tell her
bags.
that.
Yeah, not to worry, there's no changing. Yep. No, the kids used to change, but they don't change anymore.
Oh, wow.
Anybody else at all? Any other questions? Are you sure? Anybody here? Any closing comments? Nothing online?
Nope.
All right. So I'll just say thank you very much for coming out. We appreciate it. Hopefully this has been very informative and provides at least an outline from middle school to high school, which was our purpose. And then again, if you have any questions or further questions for those that are watching or will watch, we encourage you to reach out to us. Anyone who's sitting up here will be a source of information and help in anything that comes up within the school year. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Good.
Yeah.